It's mid-June. There's not a ton to talk about in the NFL world, but over this past week, we did have a lot of mandatory mini camps, a lot of OTAs wrap themselves up, and in today's video, I'm going to break down all of the major fantasy football takeaways from a redraft perspective, from a dynasty perspective, that you need to be paying attention to from this period of time that we saw these players on the field. So I'm going to cover every team, going to go division by division. Of course, if you want to skip ahead to your favorite team or, certain storylines that you're interested in, there is timestamps across the scroll bar. Also, feel free to let me know down below in the comment section anything that I missed, especially if it's about your own favorite team. I know you guys follow your teams very, very closely, and sometimes I can't get to everything. So if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start it off with the AFC East and the Buffalo Bills. Stephon Diggs is reportedly unhappy with the play calling, his role in the offense, Josh Allen, among other things. A lot of people thought the hold in that he's kind of been, displaying the last couple days was a result of a contract situation, but it seems he's just kind of unhappy with the direction of the team. This has been probably one of the biggest storylines, I would say, coming out of minicamp across the entire NFL. He did participate in OTAs, though, in a limited fashion towards the end of the camp. So Sean McDermott said this about the Stephon Diggs saga. He said they got to a point where we just felt like we all needed a break, needed some space. It sounds like he kind of aired his grievances, and then, of course, we're going to have a number of weeks where these players are on vacation until they come back to training camp in late July. So apparently both sides are, fine with what's going on, and there's not too much to worry about. If you guys are contenders in dynasty leagues right now and some people are really nervous about this situation, feel free to send out some offers. If he slips in underdog drafts or best ball drafts that you guys are doing right now, definitely maybe take the value at that point in time. But we can move on to the Miami Dolphins. The biggest news out of Miami is still the mutual interest shown between the Dolphins and Dalvin Cook, who's now a free agent running back after being cut by the Vikings last week. They have reportedly been monitoring this situation all the way back to like February and March when it was first kind of rumored that Dalvin Cook might be on the chopping block or the trade block. And Cook recently came out and said that he wants to play for a contender, wants to play for a team that has a chance to win a Lombardi trophy. And it is worth noting that Dalvin Cook is from Miami, so I'm sure he would like to play for his hometown team, his hometown Miami Dolphins. This would obviously shake up this backfield a ton should he sign with the Miami Dolphins, leaving Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert probably to backups and limiting any ceiling you had in mind for Devon Achane. So I personally expect, if I was a betting person right now, I would, expect Dalvin Cook to land with the Miami Dolphins, but nothing is set in stone. There's other teams that are interested in Dalvin Cook and all that stuff. So the New York Jets, another AFC East team here. Apparently Aaron Rodgers to Garrett Wilson is looking like a connection that's developing. That's probably no surprise to anybody. But the biggest news for me coming out of the New York Jets mini camps has been the optimism for star running back Breece Hall. Breece Hall will be about, 10 and a half months, 11 months removed from his ACL surgery come week one. The closest example we've seen to somebody like Breece Hall, an elite running back, an elite athleticism running back, high draft capital, a lot of optimism, was Saquon Barkley back in 2021 when he was a third-year running back, tore his ACL, came back in 2021, looked like he was working his way back until he suffered a freak ankle injury against the Cowboys in week 5 of 2021. Hall is likely off of my redraft board. I'm not really excited about Breece Hall, where he's currently going. He's like a 2-3 turn pick at the moment. Unless we see him playing full tilt, looking exactly like he was his rookie year in the preseason games and that kind of stuff, I just personally am going to have I think people are going to have buyer's remorse on Breece Hall, knowing that he might get off to a slow start. He might not be the same player quite this season. We know the data suggests that, first year off the ACL tear, running backs usually are not the same type of players. He isn't practicing yet, and even though he's, looks good according to Robert Saleh, you don't really want to go too fast with the ACL. You have to balance it out with the strength. He looks strong. He looks powerful. He's learning. All this stuff has been said about Breece Hall. So some optimism, but not necessarily enough for me to buy fully back in until I see him on the field totally 100% for training camp and for preseason games. To close out this division, we go to the New England Patriots. Definitely some optimism around Mac Jones. The once very promising rookie season that he had a couple of years ago has seemed to slip the minds of dynasty players. There is supposedly no competition at quarterback, so if anybody's worried about Bailey Zappi, it seems to be Mac Jones' job to lose. And the other big news in New England that's bubbling up is the potential landing spot for DeAndre Hopkins, who had a visit with them last week. Apparently, they've extended an offer out to him as well. And apparently, according to some sources, I'm not exactly sure how accurate they are, there is a deal in place that could potentially be done. And the visit was very positive for both sides. So DeAndre Hopkins, again, similar to the Dalvin Cook situation, if I had to bet on where he was going to go, I would say probably New England. We know that Bill Belichick and him have had a pretty good relationship. It sounds like the contract offer was, adequate that they offered him. They obviously could use the wide receiver help that DeAndre Hopkins can bring. So he's very interesting. And I think if he were to go to New England, it's kind of like a sneaky decent landing spot for him because he would be the clear alpha number one wide receiver in that situation. So let's move on over to the NFC East, where we look at the Washington Commanders. The biggest news surrounding Washington is definitely their battle for the quarterback one spot. It looks as though the coaching staff wants Sam Howell to win the job, fifth-round rookie from last year, and Brissett is simply there in case Sam Howell can't handle it, which I think is exactly the way that you would want to bring along a rookie quarterback. You have a veteran behind him who you don't really, view as your future. You don't really view him as a guy that you want to be a long-term starter for you. But if Sam Howell is struggling and can't, start or, it's too much for him or he just isn't good, then they can pivot to Brissett and probably still win some games. The news out of Washington has been mostly all positive on Sam Howell. That will be something to monitor as we enter training camp. And I would say, generally speaking, this is probably stock up on Sam Howell. If that's how, they're going to handle this situation, I think that's better than some people maybe have initially anticipated. And Ron Rivera has basically talked about how he showed us the arm talent. He showed us everything that they need to get excited about him. So good news for Sam Howell, dynasty managers. I have a lot of shares of him, so I'm very excited about that. On to the Dallas Cowboys. There's not a ton going on in Dallas right now. The most interesting minicamp and offseason storyline for me is Michael Gallup, who was downright awful in 2022, but he was less than 100%, right? He tore his ACL in January of 2022, so he was less than 9 months of the ACL tear when he first played his first game, and then he suffered some setbacks, said he wasn't feeling right mentally, as you guys can see on the screen with this quote. The situation with Michael Gallup is very interesting because as much as Brandon Cooks is probably a better receiver than Michael Gallup, in the aggregate across most of the NFL seasons, there was a time where we were very excited about Michael Gallup's ability, and if he's that same player, the player before he got disrupted by the ACL tear, it's very possible with Brandon Cooks' injury history and his advanced age that Michael Gallup could still be the number 2 receiver for this team, and he's available for basically nothing in dynasty leagues and basically nothing in underdog drafts as well, and he's a guy that I've drafted a ton of in both formats, so that's definitely very interesting. The running back saga is still playing itself out right now. I personally expect a bruiser to be added to this backfield to complement Tony Pollard. I don't think they're going to give him a massive workload. And I think his ADP on underdog drafts or in dynasty trades right now might suggest that he's going to be the only running back there. So if you were, interested in getting some exposure to Tony Pollard or interested in trading for him, I would probably wait to see who gets signed there because Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, if he could come back, Kareem Hunt, all these guys are still out there in free agency. And I wouldn't be shocked if a signing like that depresses the value on the open market for Tony Pollard. So definitely monitor that. We go on to the Philadelphia Eagles. We know what to expect from Philadelphia for the most part. We know Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert are all being drafted among the tops of their positions. I have seen reports, though, about the backfield saying that Rashad Penny might be a cut candidate. I've also seen reports like this where they're saying he might be the lead back if he's healthy. So there's a ton of conflicting reports about this Eagles backfield. Is it going to be Penny? Is it going to be Swift? How does Kenneth Gainwell factor in? Trey Sermon's even getting some buzz at some point. My stance on ambiguous backfields like Philadelphia has always been that I'm going to take the cheapest option for the most part. So even though Swift is the most expensive, Swift is the most talented, I think, of the backfield, I've mostly been fading him in underdog drafts and in dynasty startups. Rashad Penny and Kenneth Gainwell will be my targets at cost. This situation will be very fascinating to watch entering training camp and preseason games, but you guys know my stance on ambiguous backfields. I use them to fill out depth. Hopefully a guy like Rashad Penny can hit because I have drafted quite a bit of him. But it wouldn't shock me also if some of these reports are true and he is cut and Swift and Gainwell are the main 2 running backs going into the season. On to the New York Giants. The biggest news about the New York Giants has also been among the biggest news in the NFL. Saquon Barkley is pushing for an extension before training camp begins. The deadline to extend tagged players is July 17th, so that's definitely something to monitor for Saquon and for Josh Jacobs, who I'll talk about later in this video. We should have an answer before then what they intend to do with Saquon Barkley. I tend to think that they will get something done because they've reportedly offered him up to like $14 million per year. Once guarantees get worked out and some of the semantics of the contract, I think that Saquon Barkley will be back in Big Blue long term. I would go trade for Saquon Barkley in Dynasty if you guys are contenders and looking for, a running back to help carry you to the championship, because he's got a little bit of depressed value due to this ambiguity right now, and also take the value on him in best ball drafts because I think he will be closer to a first-round pick by the time this summer is all said and done. Right now, you can get him in the mid-second round at the moment. And keep an eye on the new targets for Daniel Jones, Paris Campbell, and Darren Waller also receiving quite a bit of hype as well. So let's go back to the AFC. The AFC North, Cincinnati Bengals, mostly extension updates for minicamp news. Joe Burrow is waiting on his extension. T. Higgins is waiting on his extension. It seems that Joe Burrow is playing chicken, waiting to see when Justin Herbert gets extended, because I think Joe Burrow's camp is probably going to ask for 110% of whatever Justin Herbert gets, and it makes sense because he's led his team to a Super Bowl. He's got a better resume, and by all accounts, it sounds like they're not going to extend T. Higgins until after Joe Burrow is locked up long-term, which again makes sense because he is their quarterback. They have to prioritize him. So that situation is going to be interesting from a dynasty perspective, from a redraft perspective. I don't expect it to affect anything really in season. And then the backfield is also very interesting to me because Joe Mixon has a court case trial date on June 29th. So it's possible that the Bengals are waiting for some kind of suspension to come down, or they're waiting for some kind of resolution in like a civil court or something before making any decisions on Mixon to sign anybody new, to cut Mixon, to roll with Mixon. I think a lot of people are going a little overboard on Joe Mixon right now, just assuming he's going to be back into his full workload. But I think a lot can still happen before the start of the season. And I think for that reason, Chase Brown is a must-stash in the meantime, a running back that I loved in the offseason cycle. He was one of my favorite running backs in the draft, and I would definitely go out and stash him. And they also haven't ruled out in most of the reports that I read that they wouldn't add like a Leonard Fournette or a Kareem Hunt or something to the backfield. So moving on to the Cleveland Browns, the major news has been the chemistry between all of the Browns' top receivers and Deshaun Watson. It seems as though Deshaun Watson is getting back to his old self. It also seems that Elijah Moore has been the star of training camp so far, or mini camp so far, continues to be a target of mine in all formats. I think he's a great value in dynasty drafts, a great value in season-long drafts and best ball drafts as well. The Browns beat reporters keep talking up Elijah Moore as a chain mover, a guy that can gobble up targets, which of course we love in PPR formats. Just pretend that we were talking about this last summer, right? Elijah Moore was on the Browns. He was playing with Deshaun Watson, and that same, excitement we had about Elijah Moore, it's still true. He just was like unmotivated and, having riffs with the coaching staff and the quarterback in New York. And now it looks like he's more motivated on a better team with a better quarterback. So I think Elijah Moore, a very, very good target of yours in dynasty drafts and redraft leagues alike. Next, we get on to the Baltimore Ravens. There's definitely a lot to unpack here because we have new offensive coordinator Todd Monken. We got some interesting insight from Jeff Zrebrek of The Athletic, and most of the stuff that I'm pulling from this video has been Athletic, training camp recaps and all that kind of stuff. I've been, rifling through articles all day pretty much. Faster pace, getting the backs more involved in the passing game is stuff that we've heard about Todd Monken's scheme, which of course we love for Lamar Jackson. We love that for the receivers. We love that for J.K. Dobbins. The wide receiver battle doesn't have too many updates. I've kind of been in the camp that I think all three are kind of interesting at cost right now, but I am mainly invested in the young guys, Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers at cost. In the meantime, invest in that ambiguity in underdog and dynasty drafts alike, because I really, really do think that somebody's going to emerge from this receiver core. I just don't exactly know who it will be at this point in time. And then the biggest news probably in Baltimore is the holdout of J.K. Dobbins, who wants a new contract. I don't think he's going to get it necessarily. My anticipation is that he'll probably break this holdout come training camp because he literally has no leverage against the team. If people are nervous in your leagues, definitely send out some offers for J.K. Dobbins, but I don't anticipate this holdout to last very much longer than into training camp. So moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's not a ton going on in Pittsburgh, but my attention was caught by the running back position, because we have heard some word that Najee Harris is feeling healthy. He's slimmed down a little bit. He seems more explosive than what we saw from him last year, and kudos to him. He hasn't really missed any practice time or anything like that, which is great news because Najee Harris's workload was impacted by his injury. We know he was playing through a foot injury that he suffered in training camp last year, so if he can stay healthy, it's possible that he has a bounce-back season and is a guy that we look back on and we're like, we were a little too low on Najee Harris, but Jaylen Warren apparently is also performing at a high level. He remains one of the better handcuffs in Dynasty and in fantasy in general. And I actually really like both of these guys at cost, because if you like Najee, I think you should also like Jaylen Warren, knowing that he is a high-value handcuff as well. So moving on to the NFC North, we go to the Chicago Bears. This division doesn't have a ton going on, so I'll kind of just speed through it. Nothing really happening in Chicago, mostly fluff pieces on DJ Moore and Justin Fields' connection. Apparently, Justin Fields looks like more of a leader and that kind of stuff. The running back room is the one thing I think we should care about going into training camp, where offensive coordinator Luke Getsy was very complimentary of Roschon Johnson, saying he's been able to pick up the playbook quickly and said he could be a problem once the pad goes on. But we also have seen that Khalil Herbert has gotten most of the first-team reps. So that's an interesting situation. We'll have to follow that going into training camp. I tend to just, take shots on both guys. I think both guys are pretty decent values right now. Then we go on to the Detroit Lions. Really nothing interesting here either. We got some, pump up fluff pieces about Jahmyr Gibbs' versatility, but we kind of already knew that about him. And some questions about the wide receiver depth coming from the beat reporters about guys behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. They were like, hey, what if Amon-Ra goes down for a couple games? Like, we're going to be screwed at wide receiver, especially knowing that Jameson Williams is suspended for 6 games. They also brought up the idea that maybe DeAndre Hopkins would want to go there, but nothing really going on in Detroit. Same goes for the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love called the Bears fans his father, which was really weird on Father's Day, but nothing really going on there. Jordan Love looks like a quarterback who's making his first starting reps. He looks good some days, looks bad other days. Christian Watson apparently is tearing it up. The only real takeaway I have from this Packers situation is it sounds like Romeo Doubs is going to be a locked-in starter opposite of Christian Watson on the outside. And he obviously had some positive momentum, some positive buzz early in the season last year, but kind of tapered off as the season went along as he got injured. But he's definitely somebody that's maybe a decent late round best ball throw or whatever. The Minnesota Vikings, the only thing that people are focused on is the running back room, because Dalvin Cook is now gone, right? Dalvin Cook was cut. Alexander Mattison is now entrusted into the starting role. And from what it sounds like they want to please us fantasy managers. It sounds like From what it sounds like they're doing exactly what we want them to do as fantasy managers, which is give Alexander Mattison the starting job. He's impressed them over the years, and it sounds like they want him to be the lead back. As far as like who's behind Alexander Mattison on the depth chart, Kenny Nwangu, Ty Chandler, and Dwayne McBride, they're all battling for like the RB2 slot. I tend to think that there's going to be a pass catcher that emerges, and that's probably going to be Nwangu, because he's been like the special teams and like explosive guy. But the pass catching role hasn't been very fruitful in Minnesota over the years, so I don't really care that much about that. For me, I think Dwayne McBride is a must-ash in all dynasty formats, on your taxi squad, on your benches, whatever, because he's the only other pure ball carrier on the roster. So if Madison were to miss time, I do think that Dwayne McBride would be thrust into the starting role, at least on the goal line and the majority of carries. And Dwayne McBride was very effective in college at carrying the ball. So I think he's an interesting stash and probably the handcuff you want to own if you have Alexander Mattison on your team. The AFC South, we move on to with the Indianapolis Colts. Not much to report there. The main focus for most dynasty managers and fantasy managers is when Anthony Richardson will win the job, right? I'm sure everybody wants Anthony Richardson to win the job because he can run. He's got the splash play potential. I tend to think he's going to be the starting quarterback by week 1. Jonathan Taylor is also in contract extension talks. From a dynasty perspective, that would be huge, because that means, 2 to 3 more years of, Jonathan Taylor getting a huge workload. And then also Josh Downs will be the guy to watch come training camp. I think he's going to really tear it up, but he hasn't really done a whole lot of anything quite yet. So definitely pay attention to that. We move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, where Calvin Ridley has supposedly looked as advertised, looked like his old self in OTAs and minicamp. There hasn't been much coverage around the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think of all the teams that I was looking for, they had like the least amount of like takeaway articles written about them. So we'll have to wait to see training camp, how it's going, especially for the backfield. I think the backfield is the one thing that I'm the most interested in, because Travis Etienne obviously had a pretty good season last year. Tank Bigsby was drafted in the 3rd round. Doug Peterson's known for using his running backs by committee. So I'm very interested to see how the backfield split works itself out in training camp and in preseason games before we get into the redraft cycle. I'm probably going to be heavy on this offense no matter what, because I love Trevor Lawrence. I love Calvin Ridley. I love Christian Kirk. I even like Zay Jones and Evan Ingram at their costs, and I like the 2 backs at their costs. I think that Lawrence's impending breakout will carry the rest of this offense, and I'm going to be very, very bullish on the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. We move on to the Houston Texans. CJ Stroud has apparently been up and down. I mean, mean, no shock there. He's a rookie quarterback. Reportedly, it is an open competition between him and Davis Mills, but I expect nobody other than CJ Stroud to be the week 1 starter. The connection with Nico Collins apparently has been present in OTAs and minicamp. Nico Collins was actually on pace for 119 targets in his 9 healthy games last year, and he had 10 targets in the only game without Brandon Cooks on the field. So he could be an inexpensive breakout candidate, especially if CJ Stroud hits the ground running. For those of you guys like me who play in a bunch of leagues where wide receivers and young wide receivers especially get valued really, really highly and everybody's really excited about them, Nico Collins is one of these guys that's actually slipping under the radar a little bit that has some legitimate potential. He's 6'4", 210 pounds, ran fast, has some good target share numbers over the past couple of years. Definitely an interesting guy to potentially send out some offers for or to draft in best ball. So the Tennessee Titans, young players are the focus for most dynasty managers. I think everybody cares about, Will Levis and Treylon Burks and Chigakonkwo and those type of dudes. But apparently Ryan Tannehill has looked the part. He's looked well above Will Levis as a quarterback. He's looked well above Malik Willis as a quarterback. So if you guys are contenders and you want a cheap option, I would definitely send out offers for Ryan Tannehill. Even if he's not the starter there long-term in Tennessee, I still think he's a good enough quarterback that he'll get a job in Atlanta or in Washington or in Tampa or whatever after this year is done, if they want to move on to Will Levis, which is probably what's going to end up happening at some point. But I do think Ryan Tannehill will give you a good amount of games and some more long-term appeal than maybe you initially anticipate. But Treylon Burks and Chigakonkwo both had highlight plays that hit the Dynasty Twitter space, and everybody was excited about them. I say I'm more pessimistic on these two because this offense will probably not be very conducive to breakout, pass catchers because they're going to run the ball so much. But I do think talent generally wins out at wide receiver and tight end. But I would consider using the hype to potentially move off of Treylon Burks, move off of Chigakonkwo for more proven options. Maybe you could send away Treylon Burks for Brandon Ayuk straight up in your league, or maybe you can send away Chigakonkwo plus a small piece to get up to Pat Freiermuth. I would rather make moves like that at this current point in time. Moving on to the NFC South, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are obviously my favorite team, so I do follow them closely, and I do kind of know what the storylines are about right now. Right now, the talk has been the innovation of Dave Canales, who's the new offensive coordinator. Apparently, he's impressing everybody, including the beat reporters that have been there for like 30 years. Maybe the Bucs will be better on offense than we're initially anticipating just due to better coaching, because I'm telling you guys as a Bucs fan, Byron Leftwich was not a good coach. He was not a good play caller. He was, being carried by the offensive talent that we had and by Tom Brady. Baker Mayfield has also taken the reins as, at least right now, the clear quarterback one for this team. I expect him to probably start the most games of any quarterback, but I do think if we're losing games and, they want to get a look at Kyle Trask, they'll probably do that. But I think the sneakiest fantasy relevant nugget out of Tampa Bay is the whole Bucs team calling undrafted free agent running back Sean Tucker baby Nick Chubb. Apparently they're all really impressed by him. A mustache player in your dynasty formats and a fine dart throw in Best Ball Mania formats as well. So the Atlanta Falcons, they made the dynasty Twitter sphere news cycle as well with, word that Bijan Robinson would be deployed all over the formation. I mean, we already knew that was going to happen because he was capable of that. So to me, that wasn't really news, but it shouldn't shock anybody that he's impressing people. I think the most interesting nugget, like sleeper nugget, was the praise for Cordero Patterson, who obviously has been very fantasy relevant the last 2 years. The Falcons don't really have a spot for him, at least in the backfield, but it's possible that he could be their second best receiver opposite Drake London or, used in the slot or whatever the case is. So Cordero Patterson, the only place that he's been very productive has been with Arthur Smith in Atlanta. So I kind of trust Arthur Smith to make him more relevant than maybe we're initially anticipating right now. So if you guys are in underdog drafts, I think he is a perfect 18th round dart throw because he is going undrafted for the most part. And if you wanted to get him as a throw in or trade for him with like a 4th round pick, if you're a contender, I don't think that's a terrible move to make either. The Carolina Panthers, the main takeaway is that Bryce Young has apparently already won over his teammates and already looks as advertised. Brian Burns said he has like an attitude like he's humble, but he also knows he's the shit at the same time, which shouldn't shock any of us because, Bryce Young was that guy at Alabama. He was, the greatest, young, small quarterback we've ever seen in college. So Bryce Young impressing at Carolina Panthers minicamp doesn't shock me one bit. Also, get ready for the training camp buzz that Jonathan Mingo is going to generate because he's big, he's fast, and that's a perfect recipe for offseason hype pieces. So if you guys have Jonathan Mingo in Dynasty and maybe you drafted him before you saw our videos about how he's not the greatest prospect in the world, I would say hold him for the time being and wait until training camp, wait until preseason games because he is the type of player that will get a ton of hype and you can probably sell him for an early to mid second rounder next year, or maybe you can sell him for a more proven option or something like that. So definitely be on the lookout for Jonathan Mingo. The New Orleans Saints, the big takeaway for me is that Taysom Hill is an excellent value in underdog drafts and in Dynasty as well. He has a tight end designation. We got to remember this about him. But now that Derek Carr is the quarterback, I don't expect him to play quarterback very much. But Taysom Hill has the ability to win people weeks, and we saw that from him last year. So especially in best ball formats, whether it's a Dynasty League or an underdog draft, he is an awesome late round value in my opinion. Michael Thomas, we had some word about him potentially being healthy this year. He's kind of like a walking injury risk at this point in his career, but he might legit be free in some people's leagues right now. For those of you guys that are contending and you want some depth for some random young wide receiver that has some upside on your roster, send away Terrace Marshall for Michael Thomas and see what happens in your trade offers if you're a contending team, because he might actually give you more production and more depth than you might be anticipating. Nothing to report really on the running back battle between Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, and Kendre Miller. Until Alvin Kamara's court date in late July, I think we're just going to be kind of in the weeds with this backfield and have no idea what to do. So get your Kendre Miller shares now while they're really, really cheap. But I would say I'm really not that confident that he's going to see any kind of playing time. I think Jamal Williams is the guy that I actually like the most at cost right now. So moving on to the AFC West, to the last two divisions of this video, the Denver Broncos, Javonte Williams is expected to avoid the PUP list entering training camp. But according to some of the fantasy doctors on Twitter, he has an uphill battle because the timeline for his ACL tear is not the typical 9 to 12 months like I talked about for Breece Hall. His timeline is closer to 12 to 15 months because it was a multi-ligament tear. So for me, Javonte Williams, not a guy that I'm very excited about, a guy that is pretty much off my draft board from a redraft perspective. In Dynasty, if you're a 1-year productive struggle or a house money team or whatever and you want to hold him, by all means. But for the most part, I'm pretty out on him in fantasy football. And that pains me to say because I love Javonte Williams going into last year. The Los Angeles Chargers, nothing really to report here. Justin Herbert wants a new deal. The wide receivers just need to stay healthy. And Austin Eckler got a revised contract this offseason. So if you're worried about him holding out or getting traded, don't be. He's going to be in Los Angeles. He talked to the media and he said he was going to bet on himself with the incentives that he now has in his new revised contract. Kansas City Chiefs did have some notable news. Sky Moore is officially on watch for me. I've been on record saying that I think Rashee Rice was a bad draft pick. I think that Kadarius Toney is a walking knucklehead head case who can't stay on the field because he's injured all the time. So for me, by default, I'd have to be kind of high on somebody in this offense. And Sky Moore wasn't a simple case of us overhyping a Chiefs wide receiver when he was drafted. He was legitimately a good prospect by pretty much every metric you could have looked at. And I think him taking a step this year wouldn't shock me totally because this is a guy that only has played wide receiver for like 3 seasons. He entered Western Michigan as a high school quarterback, only played there 3 years at a small school, and then he goes to a Super Bowl ready team and has to contribute right away and wasn't really ready for that. As a face planter receiver, he's not usually a good bet to make, but he did have a good prospect profile. Like I said, he plays for Patrick Mahomes, who's obviously the best quarterback in the world, and even if he becomes just an above average receiver, a guy like Christian Kirk or Golden Tate, who I compared him to coming out of Western Michigan, that can be wide receiver 2 numbers in this offense. That can be potentially back-end wide receiver 1 numbers in this offense. So the fact that he's getting a lot of hype, a guy that was one of the highest targeted receivers, and Andy Reid said he's making a good jump and the quarterback trusts him and all that stuff, that's good things to hear. Hopefully we continue to see that throughout training camp and into the preseason. The Las Vegas Raiders are just a hot mess. This team is all over the place, but reports suggest that Jimmy Garoppolo will be ready for week 1. I'm not exactly sure what that means in regards to his training camp time because he's on a new team. We want to see him, throw to his new teammates, get chemistry going with Devontae Adams and stuff. That could really impact this offense. Then we also have Josh Jacobs, who hasn't signed his franchise tag yet, so he might be holding out. But again, similar to Saquon Barkley, we'll get that answer before training camp because the deadline is the 17th of July. And Devontae Adams has also just voiced his displeasure at times as well. This team could really, really be a hot mess this year. And although I was once very high on Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams, I'm getting a little bit nervous about these two guys, their prospects going into this year. Then we get into the NFC West with the San Francisco 49ers. Me and Danny had like a massive 49ers debate yesterday on our live stream if you want to go check it out, because I'm team follow the clues, aka Brock Purdy seems to be the starter, and he's team blindly chase upside, aka Trey Lance is the starter in his opinion. Every single word out of the 49ers decision makers, Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, whoever, has been that Brock Purdy is their guy. Brock Purdy, if he's healthy, is their starter, etc. So for me, I think Brock Purdy is a hell of a dynasty trade target right now, and I am not going to be the fantasy analyst that sits on the fence. I'm going to tell you guys with conviction that I think he's one of the best dynasty trade targets out there right now. I am willing to buy him for an early to mid second round pick because he has the potential to become a long-term starter. And even if he becomes Kirk Cousins, that's fine. If you got a 22-year-old Kirk Cousins, we'd all be happy with that for an early to mid-second rounder. Job security and being attached to a great offense like Brock Purdy is really all he needs to be a consistent quarterback too for the next 5 to 10 years. So if he's the starter long-term, he's going to be a massive value at where he's going right now. He's like a 10th, 11th, 12th round startup pick, and you can get him for a mid to late second rounder. Go ahead and send out some offers for Brock Purdy, especially if you guys are a one-year punt or a rebuilding team. He is one of the best value accumulation pieces out there on the market right now. Brandon Ayuk is also tearing up training camp, which is nothing new. He does that every single year. Always looks good, but apparently even more so this year. Apparently he's taken it to another level, so it doesn't really shock me. Some of his teammates said that they think he's one of the best 5 receivers they've ever gone up against. Doesn't really shock me one bit. Brandon Ayuk, always a great value in every format. Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray's timeline's the only thing I really care about because his return is murky. He would be ready to play in early October per the data, coming off of an ACL tear, but it's a bad team. He's on a guaranteed contract, and he's a quarterback that's not going anywhere. So some people just assume that he won't play this year. I don't really buy that. Not that I'm expecting him to, play week 1 or anything like that. And not that I'm drafting him in underdog drafts or anything. I just expect that Kyler Murray will be back on the field maybe sooner than some people think, because I think a lot of people have just assumed he's going to miss the entire season and the Cardinals are tanking for Caleb Williams. And while that might be true, I don't think NFL teams openly tank. And Kyler Murray's a competitive guy. He's not going to want to sit back and watch his team lose. If he can play, if he's healthy enough to play, he's going to want to get on the field. And I think people are underrating that about Kyler Murray. We've talked about how he's consistently the best dynasty trade target right now in Superflex leagues. And he's also a pretty good, trade target for those of you guys that are contenders and rebuilders alike. So the Los Angeles Rams, I'll keep it brief with this one. There's just so many questions on this offense. Cooper Kupp is rehabbing his ankle injury. Matthew Stafford's a walking injury question mark. Van Jefferson has been limited. No real takeaways for this team, aside from monitor the health of these guys, take shots on Van Jefferson and best ball. And pretty much Cam Akers is the only guy that I'm really, really interested in outside of Cooper Kupp, because he's the guy that finished out the season strong and looks to be 100% and the leader in the clubhouse, at least to be the starting running back of this team. So he's somebody I'm moderately interested in as well. Then we finally close this video out with the Seattle Seahawks. Not a ton to take away here either. I'm curious to see the backfield split and how the receiver room shakes out. Kenneth Walker right now I think is a great value in sharper dynasty leagues. In casual leagues, he's still going pretty high, like 3rd, 4th round. But in some of the rooms that I'm in where, people follow content or they make content or whatever, I've seen him available in round 5, round 6, round 7 of dynasty startups. And I get it, like Kenneth Walker's situation got worse when they drafted Zach Charbonnet, but I do think this kind of just points to the fact that that Pete Carroll wants to run the ball, and I still think Kenneth Walker is going to get the majority of the carries for this team. So the fact that I can get him in like the 5th, 6th, 7th round of a dynasty startup at like 22 years old for a great prospect, or the 5th, 6th round of a redraft league where he can be like the new Nick Chubb, I think it's a great value all around. So Kenneth Walker is a guy that I'm starting to get higher on, but again, only in like sharper draft rooms, because I think casual players are still drafting him pretty high. So let me know what you guys thought of this video. It was a little bit longer, but I had to cover pretty much every team. I did so like about a minute per team if possible there. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Again, if I missed anything, if you guys saw something, takeaway for mini camps that I didn't talk about, leave it down below in the comments. And of course, if you guys want access to our dynasty rankings, if you want access to our trade value charts, if you want access to all of our bonus content, including the top 10 quarterbacks for 2024, rookie drafts, the top 10 running backs for 2024, rookie drafts, wide receivers will be coming next week. Definitely check out our site, flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE for 30% off for a 2-day free trial, for 6 months for free if you sign up annually. That will cover you through the redraft season, through the best ball season that we're in right now, through the end of the dynasty season next year. So that will cover you for an entire year. And if you sign up annually, you'll also get a free consultation with one of us, myself or Danny, whoever you want to pick from. So after you sign up, just feel free to reach out to us and we will get that scheduled for you. So with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.